I traveled by air to San Diego when I was 26. While staying with my buddy for a few days, I made reservations for a late trip home. My aircraft landed at midnight, and by the time I got off the plane, it was around 12:30. I waved down a random person. He came out to assist me put my luggage in the van's trunk, but I told him I was okay with it in the seat next to me, so he hoisted it into the seat. I provided the driver my home address in the taxi sector, and he said he would transport me for $30, which was a great value compared to Uber. Behind him on the left, he went back in the car and pulled up the instructions to my apartment, and we were on our way. At the time, my apartment was approximately a half-hour drive from the airport, and there was definitely no traffic at this hour. I was seated diagonally from him. The driver was glancing at me through the mirror twice. The first time he talked, he asked where I was coming from, and I said, San Diego. He responded, "Oh, very nice," and then he asked me again. There was no traffic, and we were traveling quickly. What I was doing there. When I said that I was only visiting a friend who lives there, he responded, "Is your friend as pretty as you?" My initial reaction was to chuckle, but I found the remark to be incredibly unsettling, and the fact that it was one of the last things he had said on the journey didn't help either. His questioning kind of kept flirtatious after that. He questioned me, "What is a pretty girl like you doing traveling all by yourself?" To which I replied, "Well, I just said I wasn't alone, I was visiting my friend," to which he retorted, "By flying alone, I was traveling alone." So I kept my modest sass and responded, "We can agree to disagree." He smiled and said he was just making fun of me, but I thought it was a little odd that a man in his 20s would approach alone women. It wasn't the first time I had dealt with this kind of situation, but as we drove on the highway, I noticed the familiar overpass directly in front of my exit. He wasn't slowing down, so I shouted, "This is my exit," as he was almost there. Sped straight past it. I shouted again, louder. It was my exit, and he replied he would catch the next one. I attempted to look at his screen to make sure he entered the correct address, but it was tilted so I couldn't see it. It was around a mile to the next exit. Additionally, I began to sit up on the edge of my seat a little. When the next exit came around, I screamed loud and clear, "You need to get off here." He put on his blinker and merged off the exit without addressing me, and I saw him gazing at me for a while before turning to face the mirror, which I thought I might have caught a glimpse of. Irritation in his face, but I suppose that soon changed when, less than a minute later, he asked if I had a boyfriend. I said right away, "Yes, he lives with me." I saw him glance at me once more, and I believe he noticed how quickly I responded, so he asked what the name of my guy is. Yeah, I'm serious. I told him that was enough and put my headphones in, putting my AirPods in my ears despite the fact that they were nearly dead. All I wanted was for this man to stop asking me questions about my partner. Very strange, almost as if he were questioning me. We were in a familiar part of my town when we were stopped at the first red light since, so I contacted my family and close friends about this eerie cab driver and gave them my location in case something went wrong. I know he didn't say anything to me since I didn't even have music or anything playing that would have allowed me to hear him, but as I got off the highway, all I noticed in the mirror were his eyes staring at me almost menacingly. The light was now green, and he was still looking at me. My older brother, who must have been the only one awake, ordered me to get out of the car if I felt threatened or in danger. When I had to inform him the light was green, and he began to move again. My brother lives 2 hours away. Risk. On a weeknight, we came to a halt at another red light, and I could feel the man looking at me through the mirror. I then saw a police car sitting in an empty parking lot. We were now on a big route in my town, but there were no cars on the road. It was getting close to 1 a.m. A lot on the spur of the moment. After I got my backpack and bag and pulled the van door open, the man began to shout at me, "What are you doing?" He attempted to close the door by pressing the power button on the front, but I pushed it open, and the door swung wide. I booked it toward the police car so I could squeeze out, but instead of getting out and pursuing me for my money, he simply continued going, which was already a big red signal. When I saw him driving off, I stopped running and lowered my pace to a short walk. The police vehicle, I was spotted by the car's officer, who looked up and rolled down his window. I informed him that the cabbie was giving me negative vibes, so I fled for my own safety. I asked the cop if he could give me a ride home, and he kindly agreed. Hoping in the back seat as a terrified woman clearly helped, but do you really believe you should approach police officers and ask them to provide you with a free taxi service? No, since by the time I got in the car, the cab had already left and the policeman took me home. Around 5 to 10 minutes I let myself in, didn't even bother unpacking, and immediately went to clean my teeth before crashing into bed. However, it seemed like as soon as I was in bed, there was a knock at my apartment's front door. What if it was the cab driver? He had my address after all, arrived to steal his money or worse. The knocking continued for a few minutes, after which there was a brief period of silence, followed by further knocks. Needless to say, I never left my room since I didn't want to be close to the front door because it was locked, and in the end, that was what counted. The knock ceased and I fell asleep. The next day, I returned to work, fortunately with a somewhat later shift, so I didn't have to wake up too early. However, I received a call from George, my next-door neighbor, who said that my dad was there before attempting to get in. He didn't have a key when he came inside my unit to drop off anything. I told George that I hadn't heard from him when he called to check that I was really expecting my dad. George said that even though he was only looking through the windows, he didn't really leave anything. After thanking him for his care, I contacted my dad. I was expecting him to say he was at work and hadn't visited my house, so I used this opportunity to describe the whole taxi driver problem to him once more. At this time, he asked me to come home for a few nights, and I replied that I would, but first I needed to pack my belongings. I arrived home at around 9 p.m. I packed a bag with some clothing and my work supplies for the following few days after finishing my washing from the previous evening. Even though I seldom get anxious when I'm alone myself, something about my apartment seemed strange, and that night I felt like I wasn't alone. I think this was because I was uncomfortable with the taxi driver issue, but I also thought I could hear tiny cracks in the wood floor. Pressure from a person's weight. I honestly couldn't tell where I was stressing out, so I attempted to quickly get everything I needed and leave the home. Just as I was going to leave, I heard a creaking sound coming from the hallway, extra bedroom. Before he could reach the front door, I was outside yelling and banging on my neighbor George's door when I heard a voice say, "I'm not going to hurt you." I also saw an arm swing into view from behind the wall. It was still early enough for him and his wife to be awake, so they rushed outside and I pleaded for assistance. Rather than going inside my apartment, we called 911 and waited for the officers to arrive. Since my apartment wasn't very large, it didn't take long to check every possible hiding place. I didn't have any documentation of the taxi ride I took, so I didn't have the cab number, license plate number, or anything else. I could only describe it as a yellow minivan, and provide the description because the backsliding door to the shared backyard area was open, which further suggested that he fled through the backyard. Of the man I did, however, explain the route we drove, and the time I recall coming into town thinking maybe they may knock on some local shop doors and check their cameras pointed to the streets. I collected my previously packed luggage and headed to my parents' house where I remained for a week, and they wanted me to stay longer, but I had to return home. My dad helped me set up cameras on my front and back doors, and I also purchased a taser to keep next to my bed for self-defense. Since this experience, I've lived in 2 different apartments, never needed the taser. In addition, I now steer clear of cabs when I'm alone myself because they are more harder to track down than ride-sharing apps. However, I always read about phony taxi drivers abducting people, so I have to question if that was a real taxi driver or whether the car was stolen. I want to start by stating that I lead a fairly straight-edge lifestyle, so I'm positive that what I heard and saw on New Year's Eve wasn't the product of drunken stupor or hallucinations, but rather was entirely real. I live on the outskirts of your typical small southern town, so only those dim country backroads can get me to the boondocks, where a handful of my buddies reside. Every year, my friend Darren and his family reside in one of the wealthier areas in the area, which is only accessible by these backroads, throws a New Year's Eve party at their house, to which all of the family's friends are invited, including me. It's a fun event, so I always look forward to receiving the official invitation from Darren's parents in the mail, because the weather in the south may be. Winter was very strange. It didn't get particularly cold until a few days before New Year's Eve. I could recall that the freshly chilly air combined with the bumpy, dirty country roads made for a miserable ride home. Normally, I avoid driving with my brights on since I dislike how other cars always blind me with theirs, but this time, it was necessary because of the curvy, tight road's extreme darkness. The route was bordered by thick trees on both sides, making it difficult to see where all the twists and bends were ahead, even with my brights. Notably, the only residences between the road's turnoff and Darren's neighborhood are a solitary shack that appears to have been abandoned for years, though occasionally I might glimpse lights on inside as I traveled this way a little while into the... As I got closer, I could see that it was the shape of a lone person standing on the side of the road, not moving or hiding, just standing, as my lights lit something ahead amid the trees, white against the darkness. I was driving on a particularly straight stretch of road, utterly motionless, facing away from the trees. The woman was clearly dressed in a white gown, or frock of some kind that was entirely inappropriate for the weather. Due to prudence, I didn't turn down my lights, thus I was unable to see any distinct details in the mirrored glare of the... As I passed her, wearing a white dress, I was grateful that she hadn't stepped out into the street and forced me to stop, but then I began to question whether I should have stopped to see if she needed assistance. Possibly, she was another visitor attempting to reach me, Darren's party. But it wasn't until I turned to face myself in the mirror and noticed, in the red glare of my rear lights, that the woman had turned to follow me, remained motionless in that one spot. It was undoubtedly unsettling, and I was relieved that I wasn't the best example of a good Samaritan at that precise moment. Darren's house is located in a huge clearing in the surrounding forest, and like all the other scattered outhouses in the area, I parked in the gravel circle outside of it at around 8 p.m. and got at the party without any further incidents. Neighborhood, the celebrations continued until we had seen the ball drop in New York and our local time zone strike the 12th. After that, everyone began to gradually disperse, but I stuck around to assist with cleanup as I usually did because I was one of them. My car was the only one left at the front of the house when I walked out, and when I got in and turned it on, I noticed a low tire pressure light. Since my car is an older model, it wasn't clear to me which tire was low or how. When the weather initially turned chilly, after a lengthy time of warmth, I thought I'd be able to make it home without any problems. But as I drove away, I recalled that woman I'd seen on my tires. This kind of thing normally occurs with my tires, so I remembered that before I freaked out. There was another route in the other direction that I could take to go home in order to avoid that road, but it would add another 20 minutes or so to my journey, which I didn't want to do so late at night and with potentially intoxicated drivers. If anybody else had seen her, she would still be out there someplace. I absolutely regret not doing so. While out and about, I thought I would simply accept it and head back the way I came. Not even a few minutes later, I could still hear my tires making a noise that sounded like bare metal scraping against the road gradually, and my vehicle came to a complete halt. I remarked that this was a completely different scenario. All I could think about was if my tires had fallen off against my better judgment, and that I needed to exit the vehicle to investigate. I foolishly switched off the engine and closed the car's door. Lights went out on their own, and I was alone in the pitch blackness of the surrounding wilderness with just my phone flashlight. I looked at all of my tires, and my heart fell because they were all shredded to pieces, as like someone's claws had pulled them apart. Animal. I might have argued that if one of the 4 tires had a big puncture, the uneven road may have done much more harm, but I didn't think it was possible, so I stood about in despair, thinking that nobody would be out at this hour. I would have to contact a towing company or someone to come get me on the road, even on New Year's Eve. Of course, there was no phone coverage this far into the boys, but as I was about to get back in the car, the gentle wind died down and the branches of the barren tree stopped. It seemed as though time had frozen for a minute, and then I heard the terrible sound of a twig snapping somewhere in the trees. The swaying and even the animals that was still out this time of year fell quiet, and I froze. I had never heard such silence before. The leaves on the ground continued to rustle, as if someone was prowling through the forest. Was it a squirrel or a deer? No, this was the kind of silence of prey when a predator was close by. I immediately turned off the light on my phone, leaving everything in total darkness. Then I heard, "I see you, my." It was a woman's voice, soft and gentle, coming from the tree line just 15 feet away. It was uttered without malice, which strangely made it even more bizarre at the time. My stomach fell, all the oxygen was taken out of me, and I was unable to even scream. Just a shell fell to the ground and died. And then I heard, "Can you see me?" My fight or flight reflex didn't start until I heard the voice again, but I was confused and had to switch on my phone's light again in order to see which guidance I wanted to run. So I pointed the spotlight straight ahead of me. The lady in the white gown was standing at the edge of the tree line, her features visible this time. The gown was filthy and covered in black stains, and she was as thin as a rail and deathly pale. In my confused terror, her face was nearly unfathomably hideous, as if half of her jaw were missing, but her disordered gray hair fell to her elbows. It appeared as though she was attempting to smile at me. Before I pulled her ass down the stairs, I briefly kept the beam focused on her. What if this lady was the one who truly lived there? I'm not sure whether it was a logical idea that was born on the fly of the moment, but I had no idea. The route back towards Darren's house, that shack I had previously stated, was closer to my present position down the other way. Time to ponder. I could hear twigs breaking and leaves rustling behind me as I ran down the street. She was after me, but I was able to get away from her fast, thanks to a huge adrenaline rush. I returned to Darren's house, disregarding the rest of the neighborhood, and I hammered on the door. When I begged his mother to open the door, she answered it and hurried me inside after noticing how shaken I was. I told her everything, and she and Darren and his father were understanding, offering to let me spend the night there while they called the police for a tow. The police said they would search the area around the road that night and that I could come get my car back and make a statement the following day. I gladly accepted the service, but before I even called my own family, I just wanted to put that night behind me and let Fade sleep in the guest bedroom. But I quickly discovered that the night wasn't finished when I woke up to the sound of a faint tap coming from the window on the second floor. I checked the digital clock on the bedside table and saw that it was precisely 3:14 a.m. Naturally, there were no blinds on any of the room's windows. The woman was still out there, chasing me all the way here, and now she was tossing pebbles to grab my attention if I wasn't going to peek out the window before I heard the muffled voice from outside saying, "I see you," without a certain. I wasn't going to get out of bed or go to sleep until the sun came up, and Darren's family awoke. Fortunately, the woman wasn't there, so I informed them what had occurred, and we all went outside before the cops arrived. Discovered a huge, unfamily-owned rusty knife in the yard near where I had heard Darren's father's speech. It was likely the weapon the lady had used to cut my tires, but it also implied she had followed my car to the party early in the evening, particularly targeted me during the festivities while everyone else was inside. One of their friends reported seeing a person in a white dress roaming about when Darren's parents phoned the other partygoers to inquire whether they had seen anything unusual the previous evening from the window, but I didn't think much of it because people were coming and going every night. When I gave the police my testimony, I encouraged them to look around that shack on this road because I suspected a lady may be involved. Did, and informed me that they had discovered no inhabitants, so that there was dead, gutted wildlife scattered throughout the nearby woods. The woman I had seen was never located, which naturally raises a number of questions. The most frightening ones for me are how she was able to find me so fast. I'll still be attending Darren's house for New Year's Eve this year, but I'll make sure to carpool and take the long way around. If she was missing a significant portion of her face, how could she have said those words so clearly?